So I'm thrilled to be here. Amazing content, terrific speakers. I'm honored to be a part of it. Our session today, of course, we're talking about devising the future, emerging strategies, innovations, and solutions. We're going to kick it off with Bob Pragada, who is president and COO of Jacobs, is going to give just a few introductory remarks, and then will join us for the panel, where I will be joined by M.K. Palmore. He is director of the Office of the CISO for Google, as well as Stan Wisseman, chief security strategist at CyberRes. So I'm going to kick it off by asking Bob to come on out, and then he'll join us, and we'll have a great conversation.
Can everyone hear me okay? Yes, sir. Great. Good day, everyone. It's great to be here, and really thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. Exciting time for the future of critical infrastructure in the United States. The passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act really makes a historic investment in broad-based infrastructure and energy transition. The numbers are all over, but I think I know what got passed was an incremental $550 billion of infrastructure appropriations, and we do have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to make a down payment on U.S. critical infrastructure that creates a more productive economic environment for investment and jobs that is secure and resilient to physical and digital threats, and most importantly, improves the lives of all. However, with this once-in-a-generation opportunity also comes a risk of not recognizing the convergence of IT and OT systems, and as a result, failing to adequately secure them. Dating back to the SolarWinds cybersecurity breach and the numerous high-profile ransomware and critical infrastructure cyber breaches that soon followed, a heightened sense of awareness has been placed on securing physical systems from cyber threats. However, it's not enough to be aware. We must take clear and steadfast action as critical infrastructure community to engineer cybersecurity into our critical infrastructure systems. The business case for securing our critical infrastructure is clear. Increasing operational uptime, preventing the loss of company data, and protecting customer privacy are all among the many business imperatives associated with OT cybersecurity. However, events in the Ukraine and the recent U.S. government warnings regarding adversary attempts to breach critical infrastructure systems creates additional urgency. Recent FBI testimony on so-called Russian system scanning and cyber reconnaissance in the energy sector, coupled with the actions taken by the DHS-CISA, have galvanized public and private leaders in critical infrastructure to secure vital systems in the wake of the Russian-Ukraine conflict. And the recently passed cyber incident reporting legislation has also been a critical policy step that allows for threat intelligence sharing to defend against future attacks. Yet, we cannot rest on our laurels. More will be required of business and government, including an increase in public-private partnerships to create industry-specific cybersecurity standards and the enduring capacity to defend against and remain resilient to sophisticated cyber threats to critical infrastructure. As importantly, it's time for us to cultivate the next generation of critical infrastructure cybersecurity professionals. Cybersecurity starts with people. Our task at Jacobs, and I contend as a collective critical infrastructure community, is to continue enabling the development of powerful new critical infrastructure technologies while simultaneously securing them to prevent the worst type of breaches that cause harm to our economies, governments, and most importantly, our citizens. Let me tell you about some of the most important critical infrastructure cybersecurity challenges and solutions we're taking at Jacobs. In the nuclear sector, we manage and operate some of the largest nuclear infrastructure in the world. For example, in the United Kingdom, we support the Sellafield Limited nuclear decommissioning site. We have actively launched efforts to improve cybersecurity OT systems and have led the integration of security information and event management capabilities to identify and respond to cybersecurity events. We also provide OT cybersecurity for companies working on the development of novel small modular reactors, providing OT cybersecurity support for instrumentation as the reactors are being developed. In the United States, our federal business is a key enabler in the built environment for the DoD Facility-Related Control Systems Cybersecurity Program, which began in 2016. This ecosystem continues to mature at a rapid pace, and Jacobs provides key programmatic inputs along with an average of 100 facility designs with secure control systems annually. Now I want to turn to the human side of the critical infrastructure cybersecurity equation. Let me be clear, we have a pressing cybersecurity skills gap in OT cybersecurity. A major 2021 cybersecurity industry survey showed that increased workloads, unfilled positions, and worker burnout were the leading contributors to the skills gap. An area of special importance to Jacobs is the industrial control system cybersecurity talent related to buildings and infrastructure. At Jacobs, we discovered that upskilling mechanical and electrical engineering staff with cybersecurity skills is not only possible, but in many cases has proven faster and more effective than similar upskilling efforts in IT cybersecurity professionals. We are also deepening our relationships with universities, military transition organizations, and sector-specific institutions where cybersecurity talent already exists. We've increased the number of cybersecurity interns and transitioning military professionals that support infrastructure cybersecurity programs. This month, we announced our 3-year strategic plan. Central to this is our Data and Cyber Solutions Growth Accelerator, which is a testament to the seriousness with which we are taking critical infrastructure cybersecurity. We believe that all of the critical infrastructure markets that we serve or will be catalyzed by multiple digitalizations. This will require a commensurate level of cybersecurity know-how. We stand committed to securing these sectors and to making the investments now to meet the demands for increased OT cybersecurity capabilities in years ahead. And so, I close by returning to where I started, by asking critical infrastructure stakeholders, all of you here, to commit today to real action on critical infrastructure security. Only by investing in smart system development, effective standards and legislation, and the development of the next generation of OT cybersecurity professionals will society be prepared to safely realize the promise of tomorrow's innovative critical infrastructure technologies today. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak to all of you, and I look forward to an exciting and inspiring panel. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Bob. I want to please invite everyone. You don't need to hold questions to the end. If we're talking and something strikes you that you're curious about, just kind of wave your hand around, and I'll do my best to keep my eyes open and to jump to you, because very often the audience has better questions than I do, to be frank. So journalism doesn't necessarily mean we have good questions. We just have obnoxious ones, is probably what you would say. So I want to kick it off. We're talking about emerging strategies, but what strikes me recently is, and really not recently, this has always to some degree been the case, but circumstances emerge that I feel like could throw organizations off kilter in terms of what their strategies are fundamentally. We obviously had Log4j in December. We have threats coming out of Russia, which is challenging because how they will trickle down to organizations is difficult to define, but we're getting alerts from CISA like crazy in terms of how the critical infrastructure organizations have to protect themselves. So I guess my opening question would be, how do you develop a strategy that fundamentally deals with your own risks and threats to your own organizations when there is so much coming at you in this day and age? So, maybe to kick it off, MK, you want to start?
Sure. So, one, I appreciate the opportunity to join this esteemed panel and to talk about the subject of emerging technologies. One of the things I think you do is sort of piggybacking off of Bob's call to action for chief information security officers. Don't get mired in the tactical details of the day-to-day. I spent a lot of time, my position with Google Cloud is a customer-facing position, an advisory role for CISOs. And there's nothing worse than engaging in a conversation with CISOs who are sort of only interested in answering the mail on a niche technical or cybersecurity issue, when the ask, really, the call to action is to elevate yourself, your posture, how it is that you're viewing things, and to be thinking much more strategically about how you build a secure and resilient apparatus for the future, right? If you're only answering the mail on the things that have popped up in the last 5 years, you're already behind the 8 ball. And so it's important to be thinking about new technologies or technologies, I think, like cloud adoption that act as force multipliers for building a resilient security apparatus. And so for the technologists and the strategists in the room, it's really elevating the conversation and getting out of the small details and thinking about the big picture.
Yeah, that makes sense. Stan, as an organization that helps manage some of today's threats as well as the future threats, when something like a Log4j or even the Russia alerts come out, is it a, here's what you have to do, or is it, okay, let's not jump to conclusions that this is your problem? I mean, how do you manage those sorts of things?
Well, I mean, again, I also am thrilled to be in person again, and I'm so happy to have the ICIT back in action again and these kind of events. You know, one way of looking at it is, how do you survive a zombie apocalypse?
We're in it, huh?
You know, we have the survival pyramid, right? And one way of looking at it is the very beginning thing you want to do is find shelter. And do you rush off to a rickety shack, or do you go to a concrete school building, something that's defensible, you know? So do you have some kind of defensible infrastructure that you can put in place to thwart these kind of basic attacks? And then do you have you know, folks running around with like the chickens with their heads cut off, or do you have some kind of orchestrated approach that everybody's working together? Do you have your processes in place? Do you understand, you know, through playbooks or tabletop exercises, an understanding of how to react to these kind of incidents and events? And then moving it up, you have to have that situational awareness. You know, do you have a camera? Do you have sensors to be able to know where they're coming in? And have the specifics about what kind of threats you're dealing with. Are they zombies or are they werewolves? You know, are they, you know, what kind of a threat are you dealing with? And having that awareness. And you need to have that situational awareness. We talked about information sharing, understanding what others are doing. Do you have a radio to be able to communicate with other survivors to know what they're dealing with? Do you have ways of communicating and understanding the threats you're faced with? And finally, you need to have those fit-for-purpose kind of ammunition, you know, the silver bullets if you're dealing with werewolves, you know, the axes for the zombies. You need to have the controls you need for the specific threats. So again, you need to have that foundation, the defense, that you can actually have a reduced attack surface and have the cyber hygiene that you need. You need to have the processes in place and understanding how to deal with those threats when they do happen, because they will happen. Unfortunately, in today's world, we're going to have these incidents. And unfortunately, they may already be in our infrastructure. You have to understand that they will happen. And then have that greater awareness of what's happening and then fit for purpose specific controls.
Yeah. So Bob, I'm going to ask you a similar question, and then it dovetails into another one. But you're, of course, coming at it from the leadership executive level. You're COO and president. As you hear about some of what is happening out in the environment, and as your leadership team does, again, you know, what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, you know, some of the other more high-profile instances, ransomware attacks on critical infrastructure, you know, have the conversations in the boardroom changed, and does it impact how you communicate with your security team?
So they absolutely have changed. And I'll kind of do a past and present. You know, in the past, when we were giving, and our CIO, our CISO, would give a cyber update. That would be, the cyber update would be exclusively based on the integrity of the systems that we have. And there was very little connection to those systems and what exactly are we protecting. That narrative has now flipped over to where it is, what are the vulnerabilities in the business and the business vulnerabilities? What connection does that have with our clients and our clients' business? And how are we protecting that information? So it's gone from a systems exclusive dialogue to a, what are the business risks and how are those being protected? Yeah. For example, on the front, something, I applaud Joe, and we'll keep saying it over and over again, it's great to be in person.
Yeah.
Because I think we're so happy to be next to each other.
Yeah.
Is this, during the pandemic, we were, and from our, just to clarify from a Jacobs perspective, we have an incredible DoD and security-based cyber business. It's a large business, 4,000 professionals, and we do great work for the US federal government and security agencies. We also have a private sector infrastructure and advanced facilities world. In that world, and that's kind of where we would have the system-based conversation, we were on the front end of designing the facilities that were going to manufacture the vaccine for COVID-19. And we were in the middle of designing at Flash Space the design and construction of those facilities. The amount of client information that we had around the conversion of the mRNA technology into a at-scale vaccine production facility was tremendous.
Wow.
You think about the security that we needed around that, not just for ourselves, but for Pfizer, for AstraZeneca, for Moderna, for others, was tremendous. Let that be the narrative.
Yeah.
You know, let that be the dialogue, and then you can see it more from the perspective of the business risk rather than the system risk, because the system risk is it's almost like being out in the field on a construction site. It's the hard hat,
Yeah.
right? You want to you want to get rid of the hazards first.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And, you know, we did see ransomware attacks on pharmaceutical companies during all of this, needless to say, as well as other targeting phishing attacks like crazy. You know, what I wonder, and I've asked other people this as well, and I'd be interested in everybody's perspective, is the silver lining of the times we live in that organizations, particularly in critical infrastructure, but I would say all organizations are hyper aware of the security risk in a different way than they were before. It seems to me anyway, I've been writing about cybersecurity for years, that we're seeing more headlines now, that it's mainstream. I have relatives calling me being like, wow, you must be busy working in the cybersecurity world these days. Is there more of an awareness so that those business decisions can suddenly more directly look at cybersecurity than maybe they did before? Or is that too optimistic? I'll open it up to everybody.
Yeah, so I'll jump in here. You're absolutely right. Over the course of the past 2 years or so, we've seen a reliance on digital infrastructure that we had not seen historically. And we came to realize that not only is it a huge component of enterprise operability, it's also part of the fabric that sort of stitches us together now as a society. And so as we all sort of went to our corners remotely, we realized that not only do we need this infrastructure to be in place when we need it to be secure, we need folks to be able to have access to it, and it really, I think, refocuses efforts within the corporate structure to, one, elevate the subject of cybersecurity to the position that it is. I like to think in terms of the trajectory of the CISO career. I think we're going to see in the next probably 5 years CISOs be elevated even more in the corporate infrastructure, and there's a reason for that. It's because now cyber risk is and always has been enterprise risk. It's a huge core component of business operability, and we now realize, I think, you know, knock on wood, that without a secure and resilient sort of cyber strategic approach, you can't plan to keep businesses afloat.
Yeah.
And I do agree that that not only the reaction to the pandemic and the fact that we had a remote workforce almost immediately overnight, right, 90 to 100%. We've also had an epidemic of ransomware attacks, you know, that has, you know, heightened the awareness of, it doesn't matter who you are. You know, it could be a police station, it could be a hospital that's serving COVID patients. They don't care, you know, and they would take advantage of weaknesses that you may have to exploit your environment and extort money from you, or, you know, whatever they may want. I do think also, to your point, MK, the CISO, it's, you know, previously we had that convergence of physical and technical with the CSO kind of role. But I do think the risk manager, enterprise risk, is perhaps another path for the CISO now to go. I think that seat at the table and the scope of control is increasing.
Yeah. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, no, just both MK and Stan said, kind of reminded me of something, and just talk about board of directors and governance, specifically in publicly traded companies. You know, if you flash back 5 years ago and you sat through an audit committee meeting, and in fact, I think David DeWalt in the breakfast spoke about this, is you know, the concept of cyber risk would not even be, the audit committee couldn't even spell cyber, right? It was all about financial risks and material deficiencies, but if there was one, I mean, you had God and country trying to fix those financial risks that had potentially an impairment to the operating of the company and the effect on shareholders. Today, the CISO sits in the audit committee. Because now, from you know, just a material risk, it represents even a greater risk than what used to be treated as purely financial.
Yep, absolutely. Well, and it does bring up regulations and standards, which, you know, we're here to talk a little bit about emerging technologies as well. You know, is there enough resources and backing, I suppose, even from leadership, to look at new technologies, new capabilities to solve these problems versus a reliance on standards and compliance that have been in place and that certainly serve a purpose, but that don't necessarily fit quite as nicely as some of the emerging technologies. You talked about IT and OT, automation comes into play here. You know, is there room for that in these conversations? Are we talking more about that and implementing new strategies to be able to get ahead of these evolving threats?
I think a good leader has to impress upon the board that not only do they need to do the regulatory compliance, and that perhaps provides a driver to put in place fundamentals, but you have to do some non-conventional controls. You have to anticipate based on what you're seeing as far as the threat actors and what they're doing. There's always going to be a lag in the regulations and the standards from what's actually happening. And it doesn't mean that some of the old doesn't still work, because many of the organizations don't have the hygiene in place that they need, right, to be able to effectively thwart some of the same old attacks that, you know, that will work. But you need to also impress upon the leadership that you need to take steps to, you know, invest in controls that perhaps are beyond what is required, because that is really what's happening in the wild. And, you know, it will hopefully catch up where the standards and the regulations will catch up, but the threat actors likewise have access to that. There's their playbook. They know what you're putting in place when you're saying you're compliant.
Yep.
So it's always that challenge.
Absolutely. MK?
Yeah, my concern is that the frameworks and the ways that we look at security historically are based upon really an outdated picture. We are now living in essentially a perimeterless environment for digital information. And so while the importance of frameworks and the reliance that we have on them help from a compliance standpoint, I wonder sometimes whether or not we're pushing ourselves enough to really embrace this newness that we're experiencing in terms of where digital information resides, right? It's now everywhere. I mean, we carry around in our pockets the essential digital footprint of our lives daily. I mean, I can access things on my phone that historically I had to, you know, they were tucked away in some kind of file cabinet in your home years ago. So, and I think the same is true for corporations, right? We are now at a point where our stakeholders are essentially everywhere. They need access to their business-related data. They need to be able to manipulate it. It needs to be done securely. And my concern is that, you know, while older frameworks can be helpful, we need to make sure those frameworks are adapted to what the current and future state will be. And I know that there's a lot of work going on in public and private sector now, but the paradigm has definitely shifted.
Yeah, absolutely. Bob?
I'd use the analogy, I know I keep going back to infrastructure, kind of the flavor of the day is infrastructure, but I use the analogy of a public utility. I mean, who thinks about the public utility? So a lot of people, the states they live in, don't even know unless you actually physically see the bill that you're paying. A public utility is like the silent servant of the community until something goes wrong.
You don't have
right?
it anymore.
And
right?
you don't have one anymore. And so, you know, I don't know how many people in the audience, my company's headquartered in Dallas, And actually at the same time, my younger son was going to school at Rice University in Houston. And so we were there in Texas during what's called the polar vortex, or I think it was,
last year.
Last year. It was mayhem.
Yeah.
You know, you talk about, you think that we live, in a very developed country, and if you have, sub-zero temperatures, that everything's going to be fine because it's Texas. That nothing's going to happen to the public utility in Texas. And for 2 weeks, millions of people didn't have power. Equate that back to the cyber world and the frameworks that you're talking about, MK. These are frameworks that were there for a long time, but now the threat is very different,
right.
And we're relying on infrastructure that is dated.
And doesn't always have in place in terms of compliance all of the considerations in terms of cyber. I mean, I personally couldn't get gas during Colonial Pipeline, and I'm sure many others didn't. And I remember calling around to different, believe it or not, organizations of pipelines and gas providers to just say what were the cyber standards in place, and a lot of them were, well, it all fell under our emergency response, right. Which makes sense. But whether it was specific enough for cyber, it's difficult to say, to your point, whether they've caught up to the point.
Well, I was talking to a firm a couple weeks ago about their business continuity plan, and that's a big emphasis. And I started poking and prodding about use cases around cyber. They don't have any.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, again, awareness. We think there's a heightened awareness, but they really were just looking at, we have, again, our primary and secondary in the same geo. We need to, they're looking at physical threats, natural disasters, which is something they need to be worried about.
Right.
But they also need to be thinking about the cyber use cases too.
Absolutely. I want to quickly throw it out here, see if there's any questions there, just to make sure in the last moments. Here's one right in front.
Yeah, I do have a question for Bob in regards to the skill shortage comment you made. You talked about being able to provide training for some of the more junior folks or folks that are working in the plant in order to get them into the cyber field. Question for you is twofold. One, how did you identify the individuals that would be best suited for that transition? And then question number two, do you see that as a key component of your company's strategy to continue to stay pace with the type of resources that you're going to need in order to continue to support what you all do as a business, or are there other things that you are doing to stay pace with the resources?
So the question was around how do we identify folks that could become cyber professionals if they started off their careers in different realms, and how do you identify those folks that show those types of attributes? And then the second is the importance of this cohort of people as far as we're growing as a company and serving the markets that we do. Maybe I'll start with the second and then go to the first. The second is absolutely. It is critical that now our professionals that we look to, in the past it was the classic engineering trades, technical services, scientific services. Today, it's everybody needs to have some form of data science skills in everything that we do, because the digitization of not only our internal means and methods, but the solutions that we're providing for our clients all have some form of data solution component to it. And so that is absolutely critical. The good news on that front is, and I'll talk about some of our degree professionals that come into place, is this age demographic and generation of young men and women that are coming out of school, it's incredible. So be positive on this. The level of data skills and data science skills that the classic civil engineer that is graduating from university is way, way beyond anything that I ever, that any of us ever had growing up. So good news on the forefront. The big part there is generating the interest in order to go into those areas. And that's not a big ask at all, because they all want that.
Bob, I have a follow-up question for you.
Let me answer the first person.
Oh, the first question.
Yeah, the first question. Is we assumed we assumed that there would be, we assumed that you needed to ask if there was an interest, and then let the ask generate the interest. We stopped assuming, and really open it up for everybody. And so, the interest level is there for everybody because it's now intertwined in everything that we do. So the interest is definitely there, and we shouldn't assume that you need to have a 4-year degree, that you need to have a technical background, because there's a lot of interest and people have skills that don't necessarily show up on a resume.
So my follow-up question for you is, again, if you think about traditional IT security, it's the CIA triad. And with OT, it's many times flipped on its head, right? You're looking more at availability, integrity, and confidentiality is last. And you want to make sure that valve that is, controlling chlorine going to your water supply is operating all the time and also at the right level of chlorine in the water supply. And the philosophy of how you do security and protection for the individuals on the IT side many times are completely different. And as these convergence happens, you can't necessarily throw an IT security person over to the OT side and assume they're going to be able to swim because they have a different viewpoint. But at the same time, some of those controls on the IT security side are having to go into the OT side because they're converging.
It's a cultural, we've written about the fact that there's a cultural challenge there and conflict sometimes.
So how are you handling that as far as your staffing?
Can I add a different dimension to this? And it's been touched upon by both my colleagues here. One of the things we do a terrible job at in the security industry is how it is that we identify new talent. And so I spend a lot of time in the diversity and inclusion space outside of my primary responsibilities with Google Cloud. And I will tell you that there is talent interested, you don't have to ask, out there, and they are seeking pathways to get into this field. And without the benefit of nonprofits and others that are out there, and some large-scale enterprises in the security industry, we really have to change how it is that we identify what talent looks like, who is equipped to be successful in the cybersecurity industry. And we really have to do a better job messaging that there is no definitive path into this field.
Oh, that can come from all kinds of different directions.
You can come from all kinds of backgrounds, and it's not necessary to have a 4-year college degree, and that your pathway really can be something different than what you've imagined. But we need to do a better job in terms of widening the optic.
I agree. Closing comments from you, Bob, on the IT-OT cultural challenge, and then I know we need to wrap up. I think I'm over.
Sure, I'd characterize it this, and I want to get back to what I got a shipmate here sitting next to me too, fellow Naval Academy grad, which is always great.
Go Navy.
Go Navy. It is a lot. Well, nothing's easy, but the traction of teaching someone that has some data science skills, the domain knowledge of water or transportation or the built environment, than the reverse. And so that doesn't phase us at all. But MK brings up a fantastic point. We're doing, a lot of us in this room are doing a lot of work around promoting DE&I efforts in major metropolitan areas around the country, specifically in areas of underprivileged folks. And so the lead-in now that we're going in with is cyber, and teaching young men and women, even before they finished high school, these types of critical job skills, and equipping them to make a difference in the world. And oh, by the way, have a workforce that looks like all of us. And so that's absolutely critical.
Yeah.
I do think one of the things that's still a hurdle is getting that initial experience. So, having programs, whether it be intern programs or something else, that enables them to get that first experience to be able to get then into an organization, because even with that training, many times some folks don't take a chance on them.
Yeah, and we do have to close it here, but there was a survey that just came out that the vast majority of cyber professionals are in the middle tier, probably close to where we all are, and one of the lowest was actually the younger tier, which is kind of frightening. But anyway, unfortunately, we're out of time. We're over time. Sorry, Parham. But thank you to the panel, and thanks everyone for listening. Yes.
We are.
Yeah.
We're up to our first break. Just a little bit of some guidance on where we're going from here. We'll give you about 20 minutes. Please be back at 11:05. We'll hear from Congressman Langevin. Then we'll break for some learning hubs, which are those interactive sessions that everyone's really excited about. And then we'll be back here for lunch. So we're getting through it. Enjoy the break, and thank you to the panel.